All right, let's get started on this week. This week we started the intellectual property last week. We finished up the reading on it this week. I'm going to concentrate mostly on the section for this week on marketing. Just want to remind everyone that next week your project is due. And if there are any questions, tonight would be a great night to ask those questions. I'd be happy to try to answer any of those, asked by either chat or by audio. Also, of course, for those that are watching this later, I suggest that you contact me by email. I try to be quite responsive on the email. Of course, last week was our spring break week, so we did not have a session last week, and kind of missed everybody. And I was doing some traveling myself. I had some family kinds of activities going on, so I could say that it was a very busy week for me. But I was really not online very much, and so for those of you that wanted to contact me last week, it usually took a day or two before I could get there. Okay, so we're all waiting this week for the fourth northeaster to arrive, which it kind of hasn't done, at least in central Massachusetts. I have not seen the snow flying yet. I think it might be a bus from what I have seen, but we shall see as the evening wears on. We certainly have had a lot of canceled classes. The good news is that none of our online classes have been canceled. We're in great shape with that. Okay, so let's get started talking about marketing in an innovative environment. Even the title page plays off right from last week where I ended my presentation last week. I was talking about the forms of protection of intellectual property, and one of the forms that I talked about was the trademark. And the trademark is the key aspect of marketing, because you can look at the trademarks on this page right away, and pretty much all of them, I think, you would recognize immediately, and you have an immediate response to that. To the trademark. When you see the apple in the upper corner, if you're an Apple fan, that makes you think of all the wonderful Apple products. You see the Windows 10 there, and it probably reminds you that Microsoft dominates the operating system market, and that is something that we all have to use and do use, mostly in our workplaces. That really dominates the market. And it's sometimes we have a love-hate relationship with Windows because we do have to use it so much. You look over and you see Legal Seafoods right above McDonald's, and you say, aha, if I'm going out to dinner tonight, I'm guessing most of you want to go to Legal Seafoods. On the other hand, if I'm driving through the center of Kansas with my 4 children in the car and I'm looking for food, I'm looking for the golden arches of McDonald's. And I guess if you're a single person in your early 20s, the Tinder item might be calling to you. So you can see how the idea of a brand is a key part of the marketing program, to try to tell the customer what it is that you're doing. And that's why companies spend a lot of time selecting their trademarks and developing their brand. And we'll talk a little bit about that. First, we have to really talk something about marketing as an inexact science. Herbert Simon defined it as bounded rationality. Those of us that were educated in the more scientific disciplines, expect kind of a neat little box to put things in an equation that we can work at and say, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. And of course, when those kinds of trained individuals come to a class like this, they're always surprised that when they get a multiple choice question, all the answers seem to have something right about them. And the discussion questions, like the discussion question this week, oftentimes really don't have a correct answer unless you're one of the partisans. If you're Mark Andreessen, you think the correct answer to the question is it's about product market fit. On the other hand, if you're the authors of our textbook, Sean Wise and Brad Feld, you probably say, oh, no, 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 no. It's not about product market fit. It's about the team. You need to have an A team with a B product beats a B team with an A product. So there's not a right answer to that. What you want is an A team with an A product. People would make an argument that perhaps that an A team with a B product will fix the product until it's an A product. Good point. Good point. A B team is not a bad team. We're not talking about a C, a D, or an F team. We're talking about a B team. And so a B team with an A product, I'd probably be willing to bet some money on that as an investor. So let's come back to talking about how do you do that now. These are inexact sciences, so you kind of have to put some boundaries around things because the problems are too complex to bring down to a set answer. It may take too much time, it may take too much analysis, it may cost too much to do it, or it may not even be possible to do that. In fact, the mathematics of nonlinear differential equations was the first time that scientists realized that even equations don't have necessary answers. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle showed that to physicists. So as human beings dealing with all this complexity, we have to come up with some rules of thumb to figure it out. And usually you kind of put some boundaries around the problem. You want to put the boundaries around the problem so that you're not having to wander all over the thing. You just kind of throw some things outside the boundaries because you can't deal with them. So it is with your startup. You're going to have to find out what boundaries you want to put around it. And this chapter is trying to help you develop a methodology for putting those boundaries on, deciding what's within the boundaries, and then going after it. Now, the boundaries may be changing all the time. That's not a problem. Okay? So you're going to look at what your target market is. A common error of new new entrepreneurs would be that they want the biggest possible market. That's great. That's great. We all do want the biggest possible market. But oftentimes it's unreasonable to go after that big, large, unbounded market. Okay? And we may want to do something that's more narrowly defined. It's great to have a large market, but you may find it impossible to address it. So usually what you're going to do is try to figure out which part of the market will you address, at least first. That can change over time. Now, often the startup will take that smaller target market and then see if others can be targeted from there. My favorite story, of course, is Amazon.com, which has just grown into, was watching Bloomberg today, and I saw that Amazon was picked as one of the best places to work in America. It's also one of the most thriving, one of the highest market capitalizations. They started selling books, for goodness sakes. They were a bookstore, and they did it really, really well. And they put a lot of other bookstores out of business. Now they sell everything. I've bought TV sets from them. I've bought parts for my car from them. I'm a amateur mechanic. So they started with a targeted market, and then they moved to other markets. And remember also that disruptive innovation, which we started talking about so long ago, says that frequently the company can target a vulnerable part of the market, a part that the big folks don't want to deal with. They don't make that much money on it. The case that we've cited again and again and again is that the small steel mills, these mini mills, came out and they made reinforcing rebar. because it was cheap, junky stuff, and there was a low profit margin in it. So they got into it. They could reduce the cost. They could make a higher profit margin. Once they got pretty good at that, they began to move upscale and started making other kinds of steel. Before long, they pretty much put the big guys out of business. Not quite out of business, but they're shadows of their former self. So, okay, now I'd like to postulate a thing called the Goliath paradox. And it goes back to what we just said, that a large market is really wonderful to have, but if it's so large and so obvious, somebody probably already has it. So how do you get into a market that has Goliaths in it? How do you enter a large market with one large dominant provider, something like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple? It's a large market. That's great news. It's you got to be 10 times better. That's more tough news. But they call it the Goliath paradox because in the end, David, the little guy, wins, and so you can get in against Goliath. Now, Goliaths have a lot of weapons at their disposal as well. Their size is a huge weapon, and frequently they have tremendous lobbying organizations. So they actually lobby for market regulations to make it hard for you, the small person, to enter. And so again, sneaking in is sometimes your best way, because if you disturb the Goliath too much, they might come over and crush you before you can get your slingshot out and slay them. They have other techniques they can use. For instance, if you need retail space, shelf space in grocery stores, the big food companies just deny you the space. They tell the grocers they sell to, we want your shelf space, and the grocery stores agree with that because they have a partnership with them, and you can't get any shelf space for your product. Well, if you don't have shelf space, you're not going to sell it in retail. Although retail's getting less important, and as you've seen, obviously that internet marketing is one way to just kind of get right around that Goliath tactic. There's inelastic. Inelastic is supposed to be one word. Inelastic demand. It means that the demand isn't growing or very much. It's not shrinking, and they've already got that. So why would they switch to you, the David? Because they're already dealing with the Goliath. They can also do predatory pricing. They have the economy of scale. They can drop their prices so low, and this is a tactic often used, sometimes illegal. Has to be used with care, but you need to know that people will use it against you, where they'll just drop their price to a price that you can't match, and they don't really care if they're making money until they put you out of business, and then they can raise their prices, and it may be illegal, it may be quasi-legal, it's something that you have to worry about. Okay, the next thing that a Goliath is against you is switching costs. I was, kidding about Microsoft, the company we love to hate and we all use. Not all of us, I know there are Macahawks in the world. My son works for Apple Computers, so I'm not picking on them at all. All right, they're switching costs. If you want to switch somebody off of Microsoft Windows or Microsoft Office to something else, it costs a ton of money to retrain them. So you're probably not going to do it. And a last tactic that a Goliath uses to slay David is by locking up resources. This is, again, a thing that Apple does very, very well. They actually lock up supplies of materials and the equipment that makes some of their iPhones so that competitors can't imitate them. And this makes it tough for Android. The advantage, though, that some of the suppliers to Apple, like Samsung, are also big Android phone providers. So to a certain extent, they can, meet some of their own needs, but Apple, to its maximum extent, tries to lock up the suppliers. Okay. This is just a reminder of something that we've done a couple times already, the market stages and crossing the chasm. So I won't spend any time on that. But that's kind of what you're trying to do with marketing, is trying to figure out how to get from that early market into the early majority and move right on and crossing the chasm. And okay, I do want to just take a few seconds on what are some of the techniques for doing that. Well, one way is, if you can't beat a Goliath, join them, piggyback, partner with a company that's selling a complementary product. And in fact, Microsoft has done that for years with software companies. Software companies often partner with computer companies to distribute versions of software that can be activated later. That's also true for hardware suppliers like Dell and HP. Every time I get a new laptop, it comes with more software that I don't want, that I have to spend a certain amount of time deleting just to get the space. But if it's something you want, you can activate it, and that's piggybacking, and that gets a lot of products into the marketplace. Um, Industry placement. By that positioning, right? One of the 4 P's of marketing that we're going to talk about very quickly. Uh, uh, but it's changing where you position in the market. And of course, we have already known that Viagra was originally introduced as a heart medicine, and then they discovered these strange side effects that Viagra had, and they repositioned it from being a heart medicine to improving sexual function. Post-it note was made from an adhesive they were trying to make a stronger adhesive, and instead they made a weaker adhesive, but it had some interesting properties, and they created Post-it notes, so you can kind of tear them off, but they still stick, and you can stick them on other things, and you don't have to rip them up when you tear them off, and so placement and positioning is really important. Another way to get across that chasm is publicity. Do something dramatic to call attention to the new product. Virgin Mobile launched in Canada with Richard Branson arriving in a model-filled convoy of Hummers labeled the Mobile Revolutionaries. Actually, that wouldn't do much for me, but he thought that was a great way to get publicity for his product. We studied the Segway. Segway did a great job. They had publicity all over the place. Unfortunately, they hadn't figured out their target market, so it didn't work very well. Okay, so we talked about Goliath and how you can kind of get some strategies to go after Goliath. Another strategy, and there's a great book written that I thought you should know about, is called the Blue Ocean Strategy. The Blue Ocean Strategy says, hey, I'm not going head to head with a Goliath. I'm going to find some place, a blue ocean, an unexplored region where I will jump in. I will do something different in the marketplace. I will be different. Cirque du Soleil is a great example of that. They blended circus with dancing and almost, ballet and theater. And they got rid of the expensive animal acts and the controversial animal acts. And they developed a great niche market. Interestingly, of course, Cirque du Soleil still exists, and Ringling Brothers shut down last year. NetJets, okay, fractional jet ownership. Most people can't afford to own a jet. If you're really rich but not incredibly rich, you can buy a fractional jet ownership. Nobody had done that until they came up with the idea. Southwest Airlines developed a really different flexibility of travel, and they went after secondary airports that the big folks kind of ignored. That was a blue ocean strategy. They've done very, very well. Curves. They tried to redefine the market boundaries between health clubs and home exercise programs. Home Depot, okay? When I was a kid, we had lumber yards and we had hardware stores. Home Depot just said, we're going to sell everything. and that was a blue ocean strategy, and they were quite successful with that blue ocean. You know, uh, the I'll just pick another couple of those out of there. I'm going to do we, because we was an interesting one. They ran into a problem many years ago in that they could not match the technology coming out of the of Microsoft's Xbox and Sony's PlayStation. They just simply didn't have the horsepower to do that, and so they completely repositioned their version of the video gaming, and said, okay, we're not going to be the high tech, high graphics and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be fun, and we're going to position in a lower cost part of the market. And I visited many years ago my mother in an assisted living home, and I saw all of the 80, 90-year-old residents playing with their Wii and doing exercises, and I said, yep, that's called repositioning, and they were very successful. Tata Motors, the famous motor company, tried to sell inexpensive cars at the bottom of the pyramid, and of course Starbucks. You all know about Starbucks, so nothing to be said about that. Which brings us to the question of this week, which is about product market fit. And all right, so product fit. I love the quote from Sean Ellis. If 40% of your users say they would be very disappointed without your product, then you've reached product market fit. Remember what I said? You want to sell aspirin, not vitamins. It's nice to have vitamins, but when you need an aspirin, you need an aspirin. You want your users to be disappointed without your product. And Steve Blank's whole point was that the customer discovery process was to take you through these series of iterations, trying a variety of things until you come up with a minimum viable product that your users really want. And then you enter the customer validation to prove that you find that set of customers in a market that reacts positively to the product. And when we say reacts positively to the product, from most investors, that means they bought it. Just saying, wow, what a nice product, that's not reacting positively to the product. Reacting positively to the product is signing a check and buying it, or using your credit card and buying it, or Venmo, or whatever you're using. Mark Andreessen is probably the strongest proponent of the importance of product market fit. While investors are always saying that an A team with a B product beats a B team with an A product any day, Mark says something different. He said, you divide the life of the startup into two parts. That's before you get product market fit, using Steve Blank's methods, and after you get product market fit. And Steve agrees with that, right? You enter the execution stage. When you are before product market fit, you're focused obsessively on finding that fit. You're going to do whatever is required to get the product market fit, include changing out people, rewriting your product, moving into a different market, telling customers no when you don't want to, telling customers yes when you don't want to, and raising that fourth round of highly dilutive venture capital, whatever is required. So in that sense, it comes back to an A team will do those kinds of things, and a D team probably would have trouble doing that. Maybe a B team can. So you see how product market fit plays in with the team, and why the discussion question this week is a thoughtful question. Hey, this is nothing new. Charles Darwin in The Origin of Species observed, it's not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives. The species that survives is the one that is able to adapt to and adjust best to the changing environment in which it finds itself. And so it is with new ventures. And that's what Steve Blank was saying, right? That's what pivoting is about. Adapt, finding product market fit. It's about being able to move, be flexible, iterate, and survive. And I always found it interesting because, you know, Darwin, that people constantly say incorrectly that, it's a survival of the fittest. Yeah, but what fittest means is not the strongest. You also hear only the strong survive. It's not the strongest. It's that species that's best able to adapt. After the asteroid hit the Earth, uh, at the end of the era of the dinosaurs, the strongest surely didn't survive. It was those inconsequential little mammals and a few of the flying dinosaurs and some of the smaller dinosaurs that did survive. And today we see those dinosaurs flying around and landing in my backyard from time to time. We call them birds. So it's the ability to adapt. So it comes back to, as I've been hammering home and as Steve Blank hammers home, finding product market fit is finding somebody that will buy your product. So we talked about the rabies monoclonal antibody and the fact that we got a better rabies vaccine. And that was a great idea. We had a great idea. Fabulous idea. Nothing wrong with the idea. But until we found a market willing to pay for it in India, it wasn't a great idea because the market was really too small and people were not going to change in the United States. So you have to really think about finding that product market fit in a kind of a very systematic process, okay? And marketing gives you that framework to think about it as a systematic process. This course obviously is not going to try to teach you to be a great marketeer. We have many other courses. Some of you have already taken those courses. That's a good thing. Some of you will take them later. But in this course on principles of innovation and entrepreneurship, we're trying to be able to show you how these things fit into the process of entrepreneurship. And so we have to give a little bit of an introduction to each of these things, assuming that you're going to go on to take other courses in which you will look at these things in more detail. So the key points in this chapter on marketing are segmenting the market, finding your target market, and then the famous 4 P's of marketing: product, price, promotion, and place, or how do you get to the market. Okay, on this slide, and I'm not going to read it to you, I'll tell you a little bit about it. You can read this on your own. If you read the text as you were supposed to do, you already have read this material. When we started UMass Online, we were trying to figure out what would our target market be. And of course, the first thing we realized that there's over 17,475 students enrolled in 1,440 institutions of higher education in the United States. I think I took that number in somewhere around 2011, 2012. But it gives you some idea. That's a good sized market. And of course, we'd love to have that market. We've already learned that trying to target a big market like that is not very bright. Now, we didn't plan to limit ourselves to the United States, so actually it's an even bigger market than that. That was not going to be one of our boundaries. And we knew that there are many people who were employed who might like to be enrolled but couldn't be in a traditional institution. So we were really not targeting people in a traditional institution. Okay. In fact, we oftentimes realized that these students who were not enrolled already would be a better group than traditional students. Traditional students are going to face-to-face classes, are perfectly happy with their technology, just like if you work in an office and you're working with Microsoft Word, you're perfectly happy using Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. And if somebody comes in and tells you, hey, here's a better way to do it, you'll probably tell them to just get out of your office. And so it is with online education, that the best market wasn't traditional students. The best market was those students, like many of you, who are employed, who are working hard, who have children at home, that are exhausted at the end of the day, that don't want to jump in a car and drive down to UMass Lowell and find a parking space and and then have to go through the snow to get home, as you might tonight. Um, that market is just not going to be as interested. So we began to target the market in segments. We've talked about some of the things we were not going to target, but we began to talk about, all right, what about age? What about age? Well, based upon what I've said, maybe the traditional 18 to 22-year-olds are not necessarily our best market. Maybe we should look at the older students and the employed students. We also thought about what domains would be most likely to need this kind of an education. Business, engineering, nursing, hospitality management we picked, which was a great program at UMass Amherst, one of the best in the country. Went online early on. There's a question about what about the humanities, criminal justice. We looked at them all and tried to decide what were some of the best to go after. We eventually settled on a target market with two pieces, two segments that we've gone after. The first, our target market in general, both pieces fit in this. We're 25 to 45-year-old and needed to finish a degree to reach their professional goal. And the two pieces were students who had some college but had not finished. And the second part of that market was students who had finished a bachelor's degree but were working in a different job situation that required different kinds of training. It could be that they were a person who graduated as an English major, but were really good at humanities. At computer science. I was distracted by something else here. Were really good at computer science. And so they didn't work in the humanities. They went out and they went into some kind of a job where they used their computer science interest, even though they may not have had a lot of professional training in that. And for advancement, they needed to have that degree. So, okay, that's one group. Another group might have been a student that graduated in engineering, and now they were being asked to manage a group of people, and they needed to know more about how do you manage people, and they needed an MBA. So once we had that target market with the two pieces, we began to think about the kinds of degrees and what we might go after, and we looked for a general BA degree for those finishers, a BS in business degree, and an RN to BS degree program at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, obviously, we started right away with the professional MBA. That is always a big one. But we also looked at an MS in information technology and, as I mentioned earlier, that hospitality and tourism. And many others came along later. How did we do? Well, if you take a look at this graph, we did very, very well. We're generating a 60% net margin. And as I wrote this in 2012, I looked at the data there. I've updated this data since that time, and honestly, they're not doing as well since 2012. I attribute that to the fact that I'm no longer running the place, but others would attribute it to other things. But the point is that for that 12-year period, we did incredibly well. And we even got through the two great recessions of the dot-com bust and the subprime bust without a hitch, growing all the time. So what did we do? We segmented the market, we selected a target market, and then we developed our positioning strategy within that market. How do you position your company and service in the minds of the target market? Okay. So we saw that when you segment the market, you want to make sure that you're not being too ambitious. We talked about Segway. They tried to sell their Segway to everybody, and if you try to sell to everybody, you sell to nobody. That's what happened to them, and unfortunately, Segway as a product failed, even though it's a brilliant technological product. But we saw in UMass Online, we were successful. Um, this just recaps something I've already said. Um, just a few more words about positioning. Once you've established your target market and go after it, you do have to kind of figure out how you're going to differentiate your firm and where are you going to position and what are you going to go after. With UMass Online, our positioning statement was that we position ourselves upmarket from the University of Phoenix or Southern New Hampshire University. We said you're getting a UMass degree, and that UMass degree is the same academic standards, the same admission standards, and so on. And so that is how we differentiated ourselves. We have the same faculty teaching that. And, you have to then articulate what attributes of your product is going to fit in there. A key part of marketing is establishing a brand. Just like we saw those golden arches, as soon as you see the golden arches, you have a reaction. If you hate McDonald's, it's stay away. If you like McDonald's, it's I want to go get a Big Mac. If you have a bunch of children, this is a way to make the kids happy. That's the idea of a brand, is to try to have these attributes so that you give a message. You want it to be positive, trustworthy, dependable, easy to deal with. And you don't want negative attributes like cheap, unreliable, or difficult to deal with. And once that happens, United Airlines is really having a hard time with that. Their brand recently has been tarnished as unreliable and difficult to deal with. They have a huge problem ahead of them to try to turn that brand around. It's not going to be easy. If you love to watch TV and you see the ads for Buick, you see a company trying to change negative attributes of a brand. The Buick is a fine car. It's always rates very well in quality and a variety of things. But what's the negative attribute of the Buick brand? People believe that's a brand that appeals to older people, and it's not a with it brand. It doesn't bring any cachet. It's a Buick, for goodness sake. And 90% of their advertising is to go directly against that by showing young, attractive people saying, "Oh, it's not a Buick." Okay. So, choosing the brand is, you want a good name, you want a good logo, you want a good brand personality, and then you have to communicate that to your target market, and you have to deliver on it. So United, over the years, has done a good job of communicating to its target market, but when they put a dog in an overhead bin and the poor dog dies, or when they drag somebody out of a plane down the alleyway, that sends communication, which kind of is difficult for your brand. Okay, so you've got to have your behavior reinforce the brand. Now, I've gone through this a couple times. I'll just do it one more time. I often ask, which brand is the more valuable brand, Legal Seafoods or McDonald's? Well, if we're going out to dinner, I want to go to Legal Seafoods. If we're feeding my children on the road, I want a McDonald's. The more valuable brand is McDonald's by far. But each brand is very valuable and does exactly what the owners of the brand want. And these are two of the finest brands that you could imagine. But in terms of annual revenue, McDonald's is about 28 billion and Legal Seafood around 200 million. So sometimes people confuse prestige with brand. And prestige is part of brand, but it is brand, is more than prestige. So here we go with those 4 P's of marketing again: product, price, promotion, and place. Many people don't realize that product is part of marketing. Part of marketing is to get the information back about your product and to have the feedback from the market to make sure that you have product market fit. So product is hugely important. Place is, how do you position it to get it to the marketplace? promotion, is advertising, and publicity to get you to the to the market. Again, to get the market to know about what you do. And price, of course, is something that you have to adjust. The next few slides I'll let you work on your own. It pretty much is what I just said about product. What are you selling? Price. A couple extra words about that I haven't said yet. You can do price different ways. You can price based upon the market. You can price based upon the cost to do it. Those are the two main pricing strategies. Obviously, you like to look at both of them because you want your price to be above your cost. To be above your cost. But if your price comes out higher than the marketplace, then you need to figure out how to lower your cost. So value-based pricing is very, very important. Pricing is also used as a marketing strategy. Price signaling is something that has extracted a lot of money from a lot of foolish people for a very long time. Colleges and universities discovered 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, that raising their price indicated that they were a better college. Now that's crazy, of course. We know that's crazy, right? It has nothing to do with the quality. But the marketplace believes it does, and has believed it does for 20, 30 years. Because they say, oh my goodness, if I go to prestigious private university in Boston and pay $60,000 a year to go there, it's got to be better than going to the local public university, paying a $15,000 tuition. If you look at actually the salaries that the students are getting, that's not true. Actually, our students that graduate from UMass Lowell out-earn many of the privates, way many. People are discovering that now. So price signaling only works when you don't have good information about the quality of the product. It's used in wine a lot, right? You go into a wine store, you don't have a clue. You want to buy a bottle of wine for a friend. You're going to their home for dinner. You want to take them a bottle of wine. You look around. Do you buy the $7 bottle of wine? No. You look for something in the, it depends how good their friends are, the $20 range or above, because you don't want to be seen as some cheap guy. Now, the $7 wine might be better than the $20 wine, and there's a lot of work on that. Okay. So I've just done that now. There's a series of pricing tactics that I just commend to you for your chance to look over them as you do it. I do want to say a couple words about some of the internet pricing, the premium model that we've talked about, where you offer a product for free. LinkedIn is a great example of that, and then you pay to try to get them upscale. Sometimes you can use it for a limited time. Sometimes you have a limited feature. Sometimes you have tiered pricing. The other pricing model for internet is subscription pricing. And folks have worked on that. And so if you're Netflix, for instance, you kind of understand or Amazon Prime are kind of prescription prices. There's a lot of, if you take a good course of marketing, you're going to learn a lot more about this, but there's the cost of customer acquisition is something that you should know about. Customer acquisition has a certain cost, and you need to know what it costs you to get a customer for your product. You also want to know what your customer lifetime value is. Do you just sell it to them once, or do you sell it to them once a month? Obviously, you want to sell it to them once a month, not just once. And so the lifetime value is how long do you retain that customer, how much do you sell to them during that time, and that's your customer lifetime value. And you obviously have to have that exceed the customer acquisition. All kinds of price lining, that have different price lines for cell phones, so that there's people that buy the inexpensive model and there's people that want the top end model. Same thing is true of cars. My favorite one on that is the price lining of automotive models. This shows the Ford Fusion, but the greatest one is what the Japanese did with creating upscale brands. At Toyota, put some lipstick on their Toyotas, put an L on the grill, changed the headlights, the taillights, and upscaled the interiors, and called it a Lexus, and they sell them at a much higher price. Nissan did a similar thing. Honda with Acura, Nissan with Infinity, each have a price lining. So there's a variety of pricing tactics that one can go through. Promotion is advertising and publicity. Publicity is the best, right? Because you get that for free. Well, you're going to pay your PR folks to get that. But, advertising is necessary in many cases. But if you can do PR and get free advertising, that's kind of the goal in life. There's many different promotion methods, too many for me to bother going into in much detail now. And of course, there's a whole industry now around the search engines because you want your product to come up early on search engines, and other companies will maximize your keyword, which the search sites will sell you keywords so that you come up before others, and companies will optimize your websites so that they come up before other. Place, we've talked about. What distribution channel? Do we do direct sales, wholesales, distributors, exclusive distributors, disintermediation, the example of Dell Computer? Selling online, we're seeing over half the malls in America have gone bankrupt in the last few years. I'm trying to remember how many years that was that number is over, but I think it's about 5 years. And they're expecting in the next 10 years, half again of the malls in America are going bankrupt. You can go on to Google and you can Google, abandoned malls, and there's a whole social network around people that get a kick out of that. It looks like zombies. It's changed. The distribution channel has changed. And, this is just an example of disintermediation. You see the place going from producer to customer directly. Instead, there's a lot of myths of e-commerce. It's not as easy as it sounds. Just a couple words about selling, and then I finish for the evening. Sell your benefits, not the features. A lot of times people try to say, our cell phone has a 5.5-inch LED backsplit multi-touch display with IPS technology, 1920 by 1080 pixel ratio, 400 part. What is that, right? Now, for some people, that's great selling, but for others, you want to tell them what the benefit is. For the mass market, you want to know that this is going to be the greatest quality display, that they're going to be able to read things and so on. The 7 steps to selling are pretty obvious. You start with prospecting for leads. You make a cold contact. You qualify the lead to find out if they're really likely to buy. You make a sales presentation. You expect that they will object, say no, raise concerns, and that's not a setback. That's just, you have to be prepared for that, and close the sale. And here I'm going to stop for a second, because this is something that, as I've mentored many students and hired many people that have worked for me, one of the great dangers to selling is that when you have closed the sale, you just shut up, you stop selling, you stand up, you say, thank you very much, I'm looking forward to working with you. And then you leave and follow up later. Never talk past the close. I got that lesson once when I was coming down the Mass Pike, and they had one of these these things where they had the radar set up and they were waving people over to the side. And I wasn't even speeding, and he waved me over to the side, and I thought, oh no, this is terrible. And the officer came up to me and he said, I think that we made a mistake in waving you over, but now that you're over, I have to give you a ticket because that's the rules. He said, but if you appeal it, he said, you'll win. I said, oh, thanks a lot. So I went and I appealed it. I walked into the court and I went in and I was all set to, give all the evidence that I wasn't speeding. And the judge looked at me and he said, the officer that gave you the ticket did not show up, so you're free to go. And I started, oh, thanks. What happened? And he said, do you want to tell me the story, or do you just want to leave? And I said, oh yeah, thank you very much. I'll see you later. And I walked out. Remember that when you're selling. Once you close, say thank you and move on. And you do the same thing when you're selling yourself personally. Well, we've used up the evening's hour on marketing with a little bit on selling on the end. We talked a little bit about the materials that are due next week with your video, which can be done in a variety of formats. I'm very flexible on that. I want to see a good quality presentation. I want to see a good quality pitch. How you do it is not as important to me as that it be good and be persuasive and tell me about your product. I'm looking forward to seeing that. So we're slowly winding down on this course with the last 2 weeks to go. And the final exam then will be the next week after that. So next week, the projects are due, and the following week will be the final exam, and then the course will come to a conclusion. So thank you very much for listening tonight. I appreciated it, and I hope to see you next week, and in between, I will see you online on Blackboard. Thanks a lot, and good night.